say that there are other economists and economic theorists we have to respect as well. But linking these models can be a very hard piece of work. But it's also fun because you are really challenging yourself. And you can even build two models, a supply side model and then a macroeconomic model, and link the two models and try to show a clean division. But things are not always so clean, as I found out when I was doing my financial model. And there are these problems that you can have. So you cannot really have a fundamental reconciliation. That is the bottom line. And then there is great debate about closure. I mean, how do you really equate saving with investment is one particular way of putting it. And my approach is more consonant with Keynes and Kalecki, the great Polish economist Kalecki, that really saving is something that equilibrates against investment. Investment is what is determined within the system, and when the level of determined investment is too low, then we have problems of unemployment and severe recessions, even depressions. And there are very complex causes, both from the real side of the economy and from the financial side of the economy, and also the policy side of the economy in both the real and financial sectors. So you know where I am in this debate. Okay, you have all these different approaches. Again, these are labels that people have used, and there are people who, of course, cannot be fit into labels easily. I think I fall under that category. But clearly, I'm more towards the end of this slide here, Keynesian, Caldorian type of person. Okay, so how do we follow full employment courses? These are really various considerations that we have to consider. We have to really consider fundamentally the composition of different sectors in the economy and what kind of closure rules we use, because achieving full employment is not as simple as simply letting all prices rise to their equilibrium level without any restriction. So we have to consider unemployment closures as well. And this is much more difficult to do than a simple kind of Walrasian model. And again, we have the issue of macro closure, which doesn't ever go away. So you add unemployment, you add rationing, you add some fixed relative prices, you add some nominal rigidities, and the paradigm is really getting stretched. And ultimately, you have to get outside of the simple Walrasian framework and that kind of simultaneous equation model. So this is kind of the road ahead. Some of it is already being traversed by people like me who share this spirit. And here, there is a kind of marriage, sometimes an uneasy one, but I think ultimately a fruitful one, between econometrically estimated parameters and a kind of multi-sectoral economy-wide model. And I will show that. So how do we model then poverty? That is the crucial question for demonstration. Again, we can follow two approaches. We can assume a particular intra-household distribution. It could be log normal, or it could be a beta distribution. In my model, I have used beta distribution. Or you can use directly the household income and expenditure surveys, that is, use empirical distributions. And this is becoming more common because now we have a lot of computational power. It's cheap to compute. So you can take very large surveys like 25,000 or 50,000 households and put all that information in the computer. And then you can just, without aggregating them, just look at the characteristics of each and every household and crank out answers. Of course, you can't print it out very easily, but you can look at it. The modeling approach that other people and I have used is, we can call it dual model. When I was a graduate student writing my dissertation, in fact, I have this in my dissertation, I actually went much beyond the dual model. I would call myself a dual/n sector model. So you have more than two sectors, but within each sector you have a dualistic kind of classification. And this is crucial in capturing the characteristics of a developing economy. But even in the US economy, if you think of, say, antebellum South, or even postbellum South, or even parts of South today, you have a distinction between an agricultural sector and an industrial sector, the North being more developed industrial. But even within the industrial sector, you had very large kind of firms and smaller firms producing with different technologies, having different kind of labor practices, or even different legal status. So dualism is not simply a characteristic of developing economies. It is also a characteristic of many developed economies even today. In Italy today, for example, North and South still have this great divergence. So it can be used on many countries. Sveinar Thorbecke did an early study on Korea, which I then extended in the way that I just mentioned. And then with Thorbecke, I worked on Indonesia, which was very satisfying. And then I ended up writing a book on Korea myself, basically summarizing all these things and writing about my own work that I did in Korea. Also, you can link ecology, inequality, and poverty. And Karamo Sonko came to our school from Cambridge, and it was very gratifying that he came here mainly to work with me, and he did this work, which is excellent. And together we have written a number of papers linking ecology, inequality, and poverty. Okay, so in dual models, what do we have? We have two dualisms, rural-urban and formal-informal. You hear a lot of talk about informal sector today. A lot of the critical, empirical, and theoretical work on this actually was done at Cornell when I was a graduate student, and it has continued there since then. Eric Thorbecke is the main inspirational figure behind all this. His graduate students, of whom I was one, and later collaborators, have extended the work on informal sector in really interesting directions. And you can, of course, look at many other activities within rural and urban sectors. You can also look at migration and labor markets, all of which I have tried to do in this model. And these are some examples again, and we can move forward. Main result here, so that you don't have to wait till the end for this. Trade liberalization can reduce poverty, but the dualistic structure and migration patterns attenuate the effects. So if the effects are attenuated to such an extent that we cannot really think of trade policy or trade liberalization as the magic bullet that will solve the problem of poverty. We need many specific kinds of approaches, and that's why this book, which I edited with my colleague John Weiss, it's called Poverty Strategies in Asia, and the subtitle reads The Growth Plus Approach, that you need not just growth but other things as well beyond growth. Growing, of course, is a necessary condition for many poor developing countries, although we have to take into account the questions of sustainability. And after you have grown to some extent, like in China or India or Brazil, that becomes a very, very crucial issue. But especially there, too, to help the poor people, you cannot just rely on growth after a certain point. You have to look at targeted policies, among other things. Okay, so the quantitative result that I have here, and I have many others, but this is the most important one, that yes, if you have, say, 100% tariff rate, you can reduce it. If you have 40%, you can still reduce it. But beyond 12 to 15% reduction of tariffs, the further poverty reduction effects are marginal. And here's the model. So you may not be able to see the equations too clearly at this point. But the first two equations are production functions. Again, we have modules, and I have in the book a published version of that. But these kind of production functions are called constant elasticity production functions. The Cobb-Douglas production function, as you will recall, when alpha plus beta, those parameters equal 1, it's a constant returns to scale production function. Now, of course, alpha and beta can vary. You can have an increasing returns to scale production function as well if alpha plus beta is greater than 1, but you don't have a lot of neat results then that go with the production function. If you want to break it up and also answer the question, how does the elasticity, that is capital labor ratio, change when the price ratio changes between wage rate for labor and rental rate for capital, then you can introduce a new parameter called elasticity of substitution. And that was done by John Hicks theoretically. And one way to extend the Cobb-Douglas production function model is to replace the Cobb-Douglas production function, which was used earlier, with this kind of production function. So this was an innovation that in this type of model, I think, was first done by my work. And then we have, of course, the factor market. You can look at the income in the informal sector, price of commodities in the informal sector, and there are two kinds of labor here, unskilled and skilled. And so you have to look at the wages of unskilled labor and wage of skilled labor as well. And the last equation there, WU, let's see, that's the you cannot probably read it. I think it's EX. Yeah, that's the export sector. So there is production in the rural area for the export sector in this model. That's given by that equation. But of course, we have wages of the skilled workers in the other sectors, and you can see those. And then there is a wage in the import competing sector. And in that sector, workers also have a kind of risk aversion parameter. They are not going to support import liberalization if it actually means that they are going to lose income from import competition. And then you have to look at disposable income and savings. There are 9 household groups in this model. There are 4 sectors. Rural, urban, and informal, formal within each. And then you have this 9 households, so you have disposable income and savings for all these 9 groups. And then you have demand by all the different household groups for products from these 4 sectors. So you'll have a number of equations for that. And then you have the foreign trade, where you have one equation for imports, another equation for export. And finally, we come to the equilibrium conditions, where you have a labor market equilibrium condition, one for the unskilled, one for the skilled, and then you have an export sector equilibrium condition. You have also a price condition where you have the tariff rate, which is T. So that is the crucial parameter in equation number 56. And then you use the price of export as the numeraire, and that is set equal to 1. So when you solve the model, you get the other prices in terms of deviation from 1. And once you get those prices, then you can solve for quantities in the model. And then once you change the T, which is the crucial parameter here, then you can crank out another set of equilibrium prices and the implications for poverty. Well, one crucial point here is the poverty line. which is endogenous. Poverty line is something that you can get, of course, from work by statisticians and econometricians within the country at the World Bank and other organizations like International Food Policy Research Institute in Washington, D.C., Food and Agricultural Organization in Rome, and other places like that. But you have to translate it into a basket of commodities. And then you have to ask yourself, at new prices, what would have to be the total income of a person so that you can be above the poverty line. So with each change in price, you get a new poverty line. And that's a realistic way of looking at poverty line. So once you have done that, then you can look at various cases. Here I have a base case, which is rate in 87. And from Indian national statistics, we have poverty headcount and something called poverty gap, which is by how many rupees, that is the currency in India, poor person falls short of being just at poverty line. And then you add them up for all the poor people, and then you take that as a percentage of total income. And that's why you get a very small percentage, because poor people have usually very low income, and poverty line is low, and the gap is usually low. But for the poor people, that is not a very good consolation, of course. And if you look at, again, you may not be able to see them, so I will articulate them. Rural smallholders actually are the poorest in India. And it is not surprising that with neoliberal policies, you find a lot of problems among the small farmers in India. A lot of them have committed suicide because of this liberalization and loss of income, loss of farms, being indebted, and so on and so forth. And the change is almost zero in most simulations. In one, it is exactly zero. For others, you will see that under change column there is a negative sign, and that means poverty is reduced for those groups. But in the urban informal sector, that's the other sector where results are very dismal, and there are lots of people in urban informal sector even within this model. And if you relax the assumptions of this model, there are even more in the urban informal sector as people get kicked out from the countryside and are forced to migrate to the urban areas. Basically, they end up in urban slums, which is a key problem in this area. The groups that don't have poverty problem, of course, one are the capitalist households, rural capitalist and urban capitalist, people who have enough assets and income from those assets in the form of capital and land and other things. And there is another household I haven't shown here, bureaucrats. Bureaucrats also don't have any poverty problem by official statistics, although there are some bureaucrats who don't have very high income, and usually that's one problem that is associated with corruption and bribery at low levels. But at high levels, that's a different problem. I think it's just greed and aspirations beyond your means, and that's a very complex issue. So again, I show other results in terms of changes in poverty, and basically the change is not very much if you look at the rightmost column towards the end. And I show it for several different measures. Headcount measure, the poverty gap measure, and then what is called poverty severity. And that index was invented by Thorbecke, basically, and then two other students of him helped him with some aspects, and he was generous enough to give them credit as well. So that is, in a nutshell, an example. Yeah.
How did so those are simulations?
These are simulations because you are changing the tax rate, the tariff rate.
Okay, so those are just simulations of different tariff rates?
That's right.
Okay.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. So each time you run the model again
Okay.
for each value of the tariff rate. So infrastructure is something that we have left out of this model. One way to enrich the model would be to add formal and informal activities in infrastructure, then compute direct and indirect effects, compute price and quantity effects, map to household income distribution, and then compute poverty infrastructural activities elasticities. So this is a way that you can enrich and extend the model. I have offered the idea to various international organizations, and I hope they will pick it up and do some work one of these days. And again, because infrastructure is such an important issue, we can look at transportation problems. We can look at problems of landlocked economies. Countries like Laos, PDR, for example, it's a landlocked country. There are some countries in Latin America that are landlocked also. And we can do regional models. There are some theoretical models, but nobody has really posed the very difficult question of how to build a model that can be applied and be socially and politically relevant. So in Southeast Asia or South Asia, the greatest effect in poverty reduction will be in rural project. And we do need a model for estimating the effects, but we don't have to wait for a model to start projects in the rural areas. I want to emphasize that very much. So you do need a high rate of growth for very poor countries, once again, but that's not the end of story. You need a growth that can be called pro-poor growth, and there should be linkages with the rest of the world, definitely, but it need not be the way that IMF and World Bank portray those things.